I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today's Friday. It's sunny, beautiful Friday here in Minnesota. Thank you for being with us wherever you are. I'd love to know if you jump on the show or watching it at YouTube, or if you're watching it at Black Press USA or Insight YouTube. If you're watching it, checking it out from Facebook Live, could be the Insight Facebook page, or could be the Black Press USA Facebook page, or it could be uh, a page that you're being shared with or to. I'd love to know where you are. And so if you can just jump on and say your name and where you're from in the comment, it would be awesome. Thank you for checking us out. And as always, we want you to like and share the program. Well, Fridays we do what we call the Healing Circle. We do that in conjunction with our colleague and friend and leader, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya. She's a licensed psychologist. She'll correct me if I'm saying this wrong, and the principal at Braken's Psychological Services and Consulting, Braken's Consulting and Psychological Services. She's also the leader of the African American Child Wellness Institute. I had a wonderful opportunity to work with her earlier this week in a presentation to a committee at the Minnesota House of Representatives. I thought it was a great presentation, arguing for support for culturally specific services and resources for Black children and Black families. And so maybe she'll talk about that today or in the future. But I know that one of the things on her mind is this question of power, I think it is. I see a note here. And, what is shared power and how is power abused? So I kind of have in mind, Dr. B, turning the microphone, passing the talking stick over to you and asking you to flow. I'll play the role of a reporter and listener and try to be an attentive, active listener and enjoy this master class. That's what I'm going to call it. Dr. B, dear sister, how are you?
I'm well, and I'm so glad to see you. And we have had a good time this week trying to just shine a light on the wellness needs of our community and our right to be well and our resilience and the barriers that we face all the time, which are often institutionalized and systemic in nature. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to hold this torch for a minute. This talking stick is kind of introduce this information to our community.
Sure.
And I don't know if you can share did you get the graphic? I don't know if you can share
I
that.
do. I think I can. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I've got two graphics.
Yep.
Open
So
one, and let me
yeah,
open
so
the
the
other one up too.
graphics you're going to be pulling up, one is about a model I introduced some years ago about sharing power, and the other is a model of how power is abused social culturally, and how we have to face that power and talk about the abuses. So the thing that is on my mind is how this week we were doing things that put us in a space of helping those who hold power learn how to share it and talk about and highlighting how biases and abuses of power have just pretty much dominated the political scene of our communities in our country and our state and even our city. So I wanted to just kind of highlight that as we have the conversation about how we can use our power, how we can do that in a way that is shared, that everybody has responsibility, and then there's no fight in it against each other. The fight is the systems that keep us down. So the first one, if you can pull it up, I don't know if you can share it.
I'm trying to now. Here we go. Let's see. Screen two. And let me make it all the way out. Now, do you see it yet?
It's trying to get there. I saw a little flash of something.
Okay. I think it might be coming. There you go.
There you go. You did it.
Okay.
So, so what I'm talking about first is the construct of sharing power, and we learn as children when and how to share, But seems like when we get older and we get actual systemic power, we don't know how to do that. And so I'm just going to point out how systems can share power and how we as African Americans dealing with COVID and the pandemic of racism have to understand how power works. So this model I introduced some years ago as a way of healing from model abuses, which I mean power abuses, which I'll talk about in a moment. So if one is to share power, these are the characteristics that one would see. The first thing you would see is a push toward community inclusion. And as you know, we use the circle a lot in our meetings and in our healing circle. And the reason the conceptual model is of circle is because every voice matters. Everyone in the community has a space of their own genius and their own experience. So whether it be a child in the circle or an elder, a man or a woman, or even someone who's not the he, she, but a they,
Hmm.
whoever it is in that circle, they have to be included as we form um, interventions in and programs in our community. The next area is the respect for sexuality. And there we talk about gender differences and not just gender, but how women and men in this country, especially Black men and women, have been over sexualized, and how in our history, we've seen Black men seen as mandingos who are doing things that gonna always rape a white woman, and so it's a whole lot of that around the sexuality issues. We talk about Emmett Till the other week, and just the
Hmm.
the fact that he had the nerve to speak to a white woman or to engage with a white woman made him lose his life in that terrible and horrific way. And that's not over. Even lately in our communities, I think there was a brother who was at the park looking at birds. I think his name was Connors, and then a white woman was there with her dog, and the dog wasn't supposed to be in that same park. And what did she do but picked up her cell phone, started calling the police, saying that she was being assaulted and by a Black man, and
Hmm.
luckily he had a phone so he could show he had a phone too, so he could equalize that playing field and show what she was doing, because she wasn't supposed to be there. And later she apologized, but that white woman card, the white woman tears that we just talked about the other day with Dante Wright, all of these issues are part of that respect for sexuality. Then we have emotional affirmation, and this is a respect for diversity. And when we emotionally affirm people's right to be there, the emotional harm that comes from saying our skin is black and it's bad, it's dark and it's bad, and white is good. The emotional affirmation of we are equally genius and that nobody's any better than us. And we have to remember those affirmative things, because in a system that is always promoting white body superiority
Hmm.
over that of Black bodies, we carry that reminder every day in our interactions. Then we have honesty and accountability as core parts of a healthy environment. When power is shared in a system, everybody understands that honesty and accountability are rooted in restorative justice and also reparations and support. So when we do that with restitution, restorative justice, we're saying, yes, we messed over you. And how can I do something to bring about justice or make it a little better? That's what that's about. Systems that are recognizing how power has been abused and used to promote others. They become honest and accountable. Then one of my key ones is shared value and responsibility. It's kind of cut off, but I can say shared value and responsibility for children. And when we see that all children are our children, then we have an opportunity to be well. That if you're going to expel a Black boy from school or suspend him, would you do that for your own child? Would you do that for your neighbor's child or your niece or nephew? So looking at how we carry ourselves, how those different decisions are made in our Black children's lives. And then next is equal opportunity. And in that one, I hear a lot in my corporate consultations about Black folks saying they came to work one day and their colleague was promoted and they didn't even know there was a job opening. So people create these systems where they know people, they bring people in that they feel comfortable with, and most likely is someone who's white in authority, and they'll just keep promoting those people in those systems. So if there's equal opportunity in the system, there will be a dismantling of privilege and a creation of fairness and equity and access. Then we move on to non-threatening behaviors. And when there's non-threatening behavior in an environment, they create safety for those in that environment to challenge and risk. To challenge and risk. I'm saying if I'm in an organization and I'm seeing 50% Black kids and only one Black therapist, for example, and it's 10 of us, I'm going to say, wait a minute, this is not right. We need to set money aside to make sure that our clients and our staff are compatible. And finally, the last one is economic empowerment. And it just means whatever, when a woman or a man get a job, that they're paid equally and they're paid fairly. We know that for every dollar a white man makes, a white woman makes 72 cents. But a lot of people don't know that for every dollar a white person makes, a Black person makes 62 cents. And we recently got a raise because it was 60 for a lot of years. So these are the components of shared power. And when that happens, it promotes wellness, it promotes creativity. People feel safe in that environment and they take risks to grow and to push and to evolve. So that's the first thing I think I wanted to talk about today. And I see my brother Oliver Williams is here, and he probably recognizes some of this from the models of domestic violence and intimate partners, and especially when we get to the abuse model in a moment. He'll certainly have some, he brings expertise to this discussion. So I'm going to welcome our brother Oliver Williams by saying we're talking a little bit today about power, how it can be shared, how it can be abused, and what that means for us as Black folks. You know, how do we engage in that process? So with that, I'm welcoming you with the talking stick. So here you go.
You have to unmute, Brother Oliver.
Yeah,
There
I
we
saw
go.
that. Yeah, I agree with you, Bravada. I see that there's a brother who passed away last year who was a mentor of mine. His name is Dr. Larry Davis. And he was at WashU in Missouri in for St. Louis for a long time. And then he ended up being the dean at the University of Pittsburgh. But he would talk about issues related to that, particularly in the clinical situation. You know, he would talk about what you needed to consider with regard to doing group work. And he would have conversations about that if you had too many Black people in a group where there was a bunch of white people, one of the consequences was that white people would get upset with it. And you had to be thoughtful about the balance that you would create in terms of being able to address different sets of issues. And I remember, and I would quote him a lot in some of the papers that I would write. And I would see some of my colleagues get upset and undone with the things that he was saying. But Larry knew what he was doing. Larry had been on Oprah. He had been noted and received a lot of awards for the work that he had been doing for a long time. And the reality was that when you did groups, you found it to be true, and that you had to be aware of different things and imbalances that would occur. So this issue about power and trying to create power or
Mhm.
create equity in the situation where there was diversity was something that's real important. and that a lot of people don't think about it. They think that what you do is you need to. I remember, was it last night? They were talking about Frederick Douglass in 5 speeches, and talked about the impact that he made within the country. You know, trying to tell the truth about his lived experience. But reading Frederick Douglass, but also reading slave narratives was an interesting thing. Where there was a former slave that ended up writing back to his kidnapper about the experience because he wanted him to come back and work on the plantation. And what was fascinating to me about it was that when he was telling the reasons why he wasn't going to do it, uh, it was like you were talking to somebody from another planet. That you're hearing the stories of somebody who lived a particular experience, but when you're trying to relate it back to the person that harmed you, they had no clue of what you were talking about. And this issue about understanding somebody's reality and understanding somebody's experience and trying to explain to them why would you want to go back to a situation. And I remember the last phrase that he said was, and I'll tell your son that among the reasons I wouldn't go back is because he tried to kill me. You know, the day that I left. And for that not to be a part of somebody's awareness or consciousness is something that eludes me. But you see it, you see it on the job, you see it in your lived experience with different people, and people not having the awareness to understand somebody else's reality or somebody else's truth. You know, it's interesting to me. So I really believe in what you were saying, Dr. B. You know, it made a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, brother. So maybe we could pass this talking stick back to Brother Al. He's been taking
Actually,
notes.
no, I'm taking notes and posting to social media, trying to invite more people to check out this what I call a master class. So I'm going to just be listening. I'll be the student in the room today, and plan to enjoy the lecture that you and Dr. Williams are presenting today. But I'm going to put up the other slide. Let's see. I think I've got it. I can just about get it up here. And if you want to keep going, let's see.
So the other half of that coin, the coin of sharing power, is how power is abused. And I think this particular model that I introduced some years ago highlights how just what you were saying, brother Oliver. It points out how people can be so ignorant of how they abuse us and what strategies they use to control and how they abuse the power. Now, this is very much like the Duluth power and control wheel. And I think I came about it some years ago when I was working with an African American woman who had been dating a man who was physically abusive. And she left the relationship. Very well educated Black woman, worked for one of those extra M's, one, I don't know, with 3 GM, one of those big M's. So she was working for her in this corporate environment. And one day she came in, she had broken up with that man maybe a year or so earlier. And she came in complaining about her workplace. And when she started talking about her workplace, she pointed out that, Dr. B, when I look around in our managerial meetings, I'm the only Black face there. When I look around, when we go to do these presentations, I'm the only Black face there. And I feel so isolated, and they say things to me and ask things to me. Like, I'm just bringing up an example. Like, let's say that happened recently. This didn't happen to her, but recently when George Floyd was murdered, I would have a lot of white folks trying to get assurance from Black folks that, oh, I don't believe in stuff like that. I'm a good white person. I wouldn't condone it. So they're coming to a person who's in an oppressive environment and trying to exempt themselves from oppression. And so she often talked about, so as she talked about it, it hit me. I said, sister, what you're describing is not just intimate partner violence. This is social cultural violence. And we, as Black people in America, we have endured this for centuries, and it doesn't show any sign of stopping.
Right.
We get a breath when we see, I remember the night we elected President Obama. Oh, I said, maybe I can rest now. And of course, all that did was make a lot of people more angry to see the Black man in power, because they didn't conceptualize the possibility that a Black man could be a president in the United States. They just thought surely, even Black folks who thought surely he wasn't going to win, so don't waste my vote on him.
Right.
When he did win, the relief, the hopes, the dreams of centuries was in that inauguration. So one of the first things we talk about when we talk about abusing power is I just hit something. Can y'all see me?
Yeah, we still see you.
Okay,
yeah, I can
good.
see you.
Okay, good, because I knocked myself out. So when we talk about abusing power, one of the first parts of that model is isolation. And I always think about it based on Animal Kingdom. There's always this herd of gazelles running, and the last one behind them is the isolated lone gazelle with a limp. And of course, that's the one that the tiger is going to attack. So
that one gets to be the dinner.
That's right. The victim is always isolated. And so when you're the only one, that sense of isolation creates opportunities for systems to abuse you. I call, when people are in this stage, I have this idea called oppressive reactive syndrome. For every action, there's a reaction. And one of the oppressive syndromes is called fly in the buttermilk. And in the South where I grew up, and they used to sing, fly in the buttermilk, skip to Maloo, fly in the buttermilk, skip to Maloo, fly in the buttermilk, what gonna do? Go again, my lady. So what they were saying, the code for that was, there's a Black person in a white environment who's not supposed to be here. That's the story behind the lyric. And so when we're in a white environment, it's like we're that little fly. Everything we do wrong gets magnified. Anything we do right gets minimized. So Black folks are always feeling hyper vigilant because they're looking for, what is this environment going to do with me and to me? The next part of that model, I believe, is emotional abuse. And we touched on it earlier when we talked about our nappy hair, our dark skin, our wide noses, our butt, our lips, things that people see as unbeautiful. The fact that we're dark and they affiliate that with dirt, and the fact that our Black men, they see them as dangerous. Those emotional components, leading to the next one, which is sexual and physical abuse. And when we have people who sexually and physically abuse us as a community, we know for a fact that many of the gynecological instruments that are used today were used first on slave women. And then there's this conception that Black folks don't have pain, that we are physically more capable of handling more pain than any other human being. Somehow our biology allows us to withstand not being treated well or properly in medical environments, getting whipped or beaten. All of these things are part of that physical and sexual abuse. Then we have of course, the over-sexualization of our bodies, men and women. Then we have emotional, economic abuse. We know that, again, for every dollar a white man makes, a white woman makes 72 cents. And every dollar a white person makes, a Black person makes 62 cents. We know about using children, how people use our children in these systems. They're Black kids overrepresented in special ed, overrepresented in those who don't graduate, overrepresented in prisons and juvenile justice, overrepresented in all these other and sundry ways. The Black kids and the Black men and women are overrepresented. CPS, out of home placement, foster care. And when we look at the way decisions are made in these environments, we see that children literally cannot be seen as individuals, but as property. So that means that they're making a living off of our children's misery. The next one is threats. And now, threats take the form of systems. For example, the system of not being able to engage in housing, looking for housing if you have an unlawful detainer, not being able to get housing if you had a felony or you're out of jail. Those are threats. And even with MFib, if you don't do so many jobs, you don't do so many things, then you're going to be threatened with the very food that you have to use to feed your children. So that's one of them. Another part of the model is using white, male, and American privilege. And for those of us who are Black, we know what white privilege is. White privilege is in systems where it's unremarkable that they're running things. White privilege is getting those jobs and getting those promotions without hardly any credentials, just because you know somebody. White privilege looks like that. And I always knew about white privilege because I wasn't white. I knew about male privilege because male privilege is when you go to as women, we talk about it a lot. You go to the garage to get your car fixed and they try to sell you stuff, talk to you and talk down to you or ignore you. All these are examples of male privilege. And finally, the one that I think stands out the most is American privilege. And what we see with American privilege is that Black men and white women, Black men and white men still are Americans. So when you come from Nigeria or Ethiopia or any Mexico, you come here to America, what they expect is you to learn the language. But American privilege is when you can go anywhere in the world and you say, "Can you talk? Do you speak English?" And 9 out of 10 times they will. And not only when you travel and you see the world, you'll find a McDonald's in Italy. You'll find a McDonald's in France. You'll find one in Greece. You'll find things that are catering to your American lifestyle. But let them come over here and don't speak English or want to eat their native foods. We start acting a fool. And I really didn't understand American privilege until 9/11, because I saw when they came out of those buildings, everybody was Black like me. You couldn't tell men from women, Catholics from Protestants, Islam from Christians. You couldn't tell who was rich or poor. All of them were covered in black soot. And all of them were walking and praying and hoping that the rest of the people they loved didn't die. That's when it hit me that I have American privilege. And I can go around the world with my blue passport, going and speaking English anywhere. And it hit me that people don't know they have privilege until it's at risk to being lost. That's when it hit me. And then the final part of this model is the use of intimidation. Intimidation is what we just saw Putin do lately, surrounding that area, making them think that he's going to not only attack, but warning and saying, "I'll double dog dare you, anybody else to stop me." An intimidator is one who's a bully. And intimidation doesn't have to be in a gang. Intimidators wear pencil skirts and pinstripe suits. And they don't have to whip you physically. They whip you psychologically when they do your work evaluations or when they don't give you raises or when they misinterpret what you're saying. So all of these parts of abuse of power can be undone if we just choose to do the opposite and share power with those who are powerless or have less power than us.
You know, one of the things that I think about is that when you talk about power too, you respond to power, not respond. You have to deal with power based on the tolerance of the person that's using their power.
Teach.
And it goes back to that slave narrative, if they see themselves as an open-minded person, they may only have so much tolerance for being open-minded. And so, if you're trying to be responsive with them, their capacity is only so much. So, you know, they may not be as evolved as you need them to be.
Hmm.
And but that also talks about the limit. That's why people may end up doing things that are superficial and thinking that they're doing a deep dive. And so there's something about one's awareness. So we're talking about resiliency last week, and I think there's something about us being in resilience where we're sort of aware of what our environment is saying to us. You know, the capacity of the people in that environment to do more than they should be doing. I talked to somebody about microaggressions, and they were all up on it. You know, they thought that they knew what microaggressions were until it happened to them.
Hmm.
And then when they had, and so everybody should be aware and respond and adapt, and until it happened to them. And then you know, we talked about fragility, white fragility. Then the white fragility came out. It was just something that is not acceptable, and you have to eliminate it. And that's what I think. You know, sometimes environments that we live in as a community, you know, that the same rules just don't apply, and you have to figure out a way to be able to respond and endure. And so that's some of the things that I think about, is that we have to understand the environment that we live in. And then um, I keep thinking about incremental change. You know, usually historically, we've had incremental change in our society. And because if you do too much, people can't tolerate it. But then the question is, we have to do too much because over the years, people have done too little. So we have to keep pushing forward. We have to have the capacity to keep moving forward and moving forward, which means that you have to demand change or get in an environment where you can flourish, you know, more, you know. So,
And,
uh,
and that piece of just demand and change, it takes the ability to be brave,
yeah,
and it takes the ability to be courageous
yeah,
when you're really up, and it takes the ability to recognize that courage isn't the absence of fear. That's what I learned. It's not
Hmm.
the absence of fear, but the ability to do what you need to, even though you are afraid.
right.
That's what real courage is, and we have to do that.
Hmm.
And we are courageous every day, whether we realize it or not. When
Hmm.
we send our kids to school worried about what could happen, when we take them to the library worried about what are the movies, worried about what could happen. And so I think as we talk about the how power is abused and how it can stifle one's resilience, but also create a space for traumatic growth to happen, that you live through that, and then you, that's where I think some of the sayings that what won't kill you will make you stronger, but I'd rather have an option of getting stronger without having having to be killed, or having that one of the options of
Threaten. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So, I think you hit on something about the tolerance. I'd like to explore that a little further about
yeah.
people's tolerance for pushing, because I think that relates kind of to what happened with President Obama when he was in office. What do you think, Brother Oliver?
I think you're right. I was amazed that you know, they call him No Drama Obama. You know, because he had to deal with things that uh, you know, that a less, I don't want to say a lesser man, a different man would react to you know, problematic, you know, in a problematic way. For example, when They were making a point to say we're not going to pass anything that he puts forward. What? Or in the State of the Union address, someone that's a racist is going to call him out, and when he's telling the truth, but it's a different opinion. Or the things that he did that the American people wanted, in terms of healthcare, recognizing the challenges that they deal with. It's amazing to me. And the other thing that's amazing to me too is when you have somebody like Trump do something that is clearly problematic, and where he says to rich people, "I'm going to give you this," and clearly directed towards them, but then with people who, some of his voters, that they're being disadvantaged by him, and yet what they're going to do is that they're going to support him just because he's white. And that what's interesting to me is this issue of there was other white people that have gotten into office. It's been amazing to me. This is the only white person that I remember during my lifetime that got into office just because he was white, and had other people work to try to help him get in, maybe legally or illegally, but just because his white privilege. And that was the thing, that because it wasn't that he was smart or that he was capable of doing something. He didn't even understand what it meant, the Constitution, or some of the activities that he was trying to stomp on. And some of it was clear that he was trying to stomp on things because, they were in the best interest of Putin and other people. But the other thing that was interesting to me is that he was stomping on things that he didn't understand as well. So so when I think about people who are trying to do the right thing for everyone, and not that I would say I would agree with every single thing, but people who have good intentions and are knowledgeable about things, that are working in our best interests as to try to create a more perfect union, and for them to be treated so poorly. You could go back to Trump and look at all the things that he did with regard to the Central Park young men of color, and he paid no consequence. He's still paid no consequences. Slowly, it seems like we're creeping up to something. But for him to sort of just ignore it and say no and get away with it is something that's problematic for me, But when you see another man that's trying to be inclusive and broader, more inclusive and more broad than I have the capacity to be, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know.
I think one of the things that when you talk about the ability to be inclusive and broad, like you said, President Trump was the least qualified president in the history of the nation.
Mhm.
In the history of the nation. And I realized that one of the things that was happening is that his election was a grab back for white and male power.
Right.
And because I wondered, I said, Hillary's white. So if it was just white power, maybe they'd have elected the one who had more intelligence and plans and get their whiteness back. But
Right.
I think it was also part of that male dominance and that intersectionality of both those things, whiteness and maleness.
Right.
Because white males are very linked to white females because those white females are their cheerleaders. And I don't know if you remember that movie Django Unchained,
Yep.
but that
Yep.
that was just, to me, that was a a class, a master class in what
Hmm.
really could happen in an
Right.
environment like that, a master class. And so in America, we still have that white damsel in distress syndrome, and they still will often support a white man over even another woman. And so I think that that's another whole class right there. But that's what we're dealing with. It was a
Right.
grab. So they could say, at least I got my whiteness. I may be broke. I may not have insurance. My kids may not be able to go to college. But all of these, I won't ever get daycare. And they're going to use up all my Social Security money before I get old enough to spend it. But at least I still got my whiteness.
That's right. That's
So
right.
what do we do about that? I mean, that's a real big problem, and that problem expresses itself in the Hooded Night Riders. It expresses itself in Rosewood and Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. It expressed itself in the riots in the white riots
Mm-hmm,
against black people in Detroit and across the country at the Red Summer, I think it was called, in
mm-hmm,
the early 20s or late teens.
mm-hmm,
And the question is, what have we done and what do we do? Let me start with an answer. Uh, I want to acknowledge the brother Sam Cooke is watching. I tried to invite him to join the conversation, but he said Trump stomped on every American institution he could touch in his 4 years of office. And thank you for
Right.
watching, Sam Cooke, and for the comment. And if you got an invitation to join, just come on in the room here with us. But as I reflect on the items that we've talked about so far, in my mind, the subset, the subtext, and the reason for the conversation between us and among us is to say, to remember what we have done, remember what has been done, and what we have done, and remember or continue to think about what we must do.
mm-hmm.
Our mission is freedom,
That's right.
freedom for ourselves, our people. But our sense of what freedom is, our definition of freedom,
Mm-hmm,
has almost nothing to do with how the society at large has been able to define freedom as
mm-hmm,
freedom without us.
mm-hmm,
Right? Freedom except for us. So when they
mm-hmm,
were crafting and debating and creating the notion of democracy and freedom and opportunity, they particularly did not have us in mind, or they had us in mind in a way that ascribed to us a subhuman or less than human status, right?
Right.
So the question is, how do we, remembering that, looking at it squarely, honestly, never forgetting it, uh, have discussions like this that are driven by our conviction that freedom is priceless and freedom is inevitable and freedom is what we have fought for and must fight for, and that freedom is something that we will and must achieve. That in fact, the achievement of freedom is not only inevitable, but it's imminent. That every action we take day by day is a building block towards that liberation that we've been seeking. And the beauty of it is, Dr. Williams, Dr. B, is that we can be comfortable and in an organic sense in saying that the freedom we seek is not a freedom at the expense of any other human being. It's a freedom that embraces the humanity of every other human being anywhere on the planet, anywhere in creation. Our view of what it means to be human, I think, and humane, um, is at the core of both the question and the quest, the
Yeah.
work ahead. That's what I think. What do you think, Dr. Williams?
I agree. I also think that that's the reason why we need to be able to look at leaders from the past.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at their autobiographies or their stories or their experiences. That's what I was talking about last week when we were talking about resilience and the
Mm-hmm.
idea of learning from my father. My father, I think I mentioned it before, he was born 1898.
Mm-hmm.
He was in South Carolina. he and my uncle, when they were teenagers, jumped a freight train to get up to Detroit, and then he, for his time, did pretty well in terms of trying to establish, a business. But I remember hearing stories from him about what it was like for him growing up and the racism that he had to deal with in his time,
Mm-hmm.
and then uh, but the successes or the stories that my mother would tell me about uh, her growing up on a sharecropper in South Carolina, and the racism that she had to deal with. It was like hearing those stories and seeing how they endured and succeeded were things that were important for me to let me know the context in which I live.
Mm-hmm.
And then hearing the stories of other people who lived and the challenges that they had to deal with, Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois, and the things that they would say, and actually Booker T. Washington, some
Mm-hmm.
of the things that he said, there the things that they quotes they uh, made that were relevant in terms of me uh, getting through different challenges, and then having some awareness because I learned from what they were trying to talk to me about. So, and then also the other things is that when we do succeed, or when we do, I don't know what you all did when Obama got elected, but I know I was a basket case for a few days because I was continuing to try to figure out how somebody was going to try to take that from me.
Was his life in danger? Was the question, right?
That too,
Mm-hmm.
it's how I know that um, uh, I'm blocking on the brother's name, General um,
Colin Powell? Or
Colin
who?
Powell.
Mm-hmm.
He would have been the first black president, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But I think there was a concern on the part of his wife for his safety,
Mhm.
and but for Obama to do it with such grace
Mhm.
and to and then the fact that it happened
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
was amazing. And then today Joe Biden ended up presenting the nomination for the first black female Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that affect me associated with it, that I take pride in that, but that people can do it and are doing it, and that we don't minimize it. But it's a reason why we need to continue to push, and that you feel that one can feel better as a consequence, and then and see the successes. I remember, I want to be fixated on Trump, as we don't have to talk about it, but I do have to say this. I remember him making a comment about the fact that the only people that contributed something to the United States was white people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that this fool doesn't know nothing.
Mm-mm.
Well,
And
but that's the standard white propaganda, and all the
right,
people he was speaking to are people who believed that he was simply parroting,
right,
the narrative that we all were spoon fed from kindergarten, starting with the lie that George Washington never told a lie.
right.
That was the first lie that we got in school.
That was
Uh,
another lie.
you're right, right. And so the culture is a repository and is reacting out of its embrace of a lie, and I
Right,
say it's embrace of the original sin in
right,
this country and culture, and that's the enslavement, the theft of life and labor
Mhm.
of African people. And so we still haven't confronted that. And I wonder, how our discussion about our unending bid for freedom takes us through the questions you raised, Dr. B, about the abuse of power and control, and also the questions you raised about shared power, shared social power and control. And what is it in these models, that will serve us best so that as we pursue the mission, the life work that we're a part of, that life work being freedom,
Mhm.
right? And freedom is not just for me personally. I cannot be free unless freedom is abroad and available, and it can't be just for people inside my neighborhood or my country, right, or my continent, or my race, whatever race is. Freedom has to be something that attains to every human being. And and if we arrive at a commitment to it, a visualization, a vision of what freedom looks like and feels like, it probably will also include a redefinition of the relationship of those of us who are sentient beings
Mhm.
to the non-sentient things in the material world that are not alive like we are, but
Mhm.
a reassessment, a realignment, a reconfiguration of what it means to be. I think is that too much to ask for? Is that doable? I believe it is, and I believe it's inevitable, and it's required if we're going to continue on the planet as human beings. Otherwise, we'll be continuing to go to the point of conflict that we're experiencing now in a hyper state at Ukraine and Russia.
Mhm.
The conflict over power, abuse of power
Mhm.
versus shared social power and
Mhm.
control. I mean, that comes
Mhm.
right down to that, I think. And
Right.
Mhm.
and
Right.
looking at the situation right now in Ukraine and Russia, I heard a black diplomatic reporter, a brother named Jarrell Starr. He's with a group called the Atlantic something. It's like a press group, but I was surprised to see him on TV over in Ukraine reporting. So I looked at who he was and I reached out to him to get him to come do this show.
Mhm.
I was impressed of a black journalist who is credentialed, award winning, and whose specialty has been Russia and the Middle East and the Far East, right? Is on television explaining what's going on and the nuance of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Well, all that to say that we have a stake and a hand in whatever is unfolding in the world. And even that conflict between those two elements of the European family has some connection to the conflict between us and the Europeans we've dealt with, and us and the rest of humanity. I'll stop there. What do you think? Because I can go on and on and on. And my going is simply to try to say and show connections.
So
Dr. B, I'm going to hand it back to you. Or Dr. Oliver, go ahead.
I was just going to say the issue about ideology
Mm-hmm.
is one thought. I keep thinking about how one's belief system influences their behavior. And if you look at Trump, he's going back to the belief that white people have the responsibility to conquer all, and not making distinctions about white people who may have uh, decent uh, ways of engaging in the world. We're talking about people who are bullies,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
and the same thing with Putin. No wonder they get along.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Yeah.
respect other people. You just trounce on them, and what they think and say doesn't matter. So you know, so there are people who in the world are wrong, but there are people in the world who are right and who try to treat people more fairly and with
Mm-hmm.
respect.
And so let me jump in with that because every year I had this poem I wrote, and I hope you don't mind if I share it.
Mm-mm.
But
Please.
every year I read this poem on Black History Month because what I have found out is a lot of white folks don't know their history. They don't know what they did to us.
Right.
And when I hear people talk about reparations and apology, I think about abuse, battered women, where the abuser says, "I won't hurt you again. I'm sorry, I love you," but it's useless because 2 days later you got a black eye.
Mm-hmm.
Now I learned as a psychologist and as a Christian that we have to learn to forgive. And it's not about what they did to us. We're not condoning what has been done to us. What we're doing is claiming our power back, not to carry that burden of holding that anger and that rage. So I wrote this poem, and I'm just going to read a little bit of it because it's kind of long. But it's called Apology. They say they want to apologize. Isn't it real good news? The country wants to wash away the lies and all of the abuse. The president is really thinking that it may just be the thing to offer an apology and say we're sorry to take away the sting. But can 3 words be so powerful as to bring such a relief and wash away the awful and obliterate the grief? How do you say I'm sorry for beating you to death, for raping you, castrating you until there's nothing left? I'm sorry, you say, for spitting in your face, for telling you constantly that you're an inferior race. I'm sorry, you say, for leaving your children at home alone, despite your fears and alarm, to watch my children while I was gone to keep them safe from harm. I'm sorry, you say, for making you porters, servants, and maids, and for making you afraid to sleep at night because of midnight raids. I'm sorry, you say, for slavery, hot wood, Jim Crow, and such, and the never-ending struggles that mean now just as much. And this is the last 2 I'm going to read. I'm sorry, you say, for treating you like animals to buy and sell and trade, by forcing you to break your backs until my profits were made. I'm sorry, you say, for shadowing your innocence with toilets for blacks and whites, for making the word colored a word that you would fight. I'm sorry, you say, for telling you who you can marry and date and love, by telling you it's not my will, but the will of God above. I'm sorry, you say, for creating places where you never gain in power, where you're always outnumbered and alone and fighting every hour and worried every hour. I'm sorry, you say, for the times that you were discriminated in pay, the raises, the promotions, the opportunities thrown away. I'm sorry, you say, for the economic struggle, syphilis, HIV, and drug abuse, and the helplessness that lingers still in the faces of our youth who have simply lost their will. I'm sorry, you say, that your men are all in jail or struggle daily fighting upstream against the living hell. I'm sorry, you say, for making you victims of my desire, regardless of the cost, for squelching every hope-filled fire until your strength was lost. They say they want to apologize. Isn't that real good news? To offer remuneration for the Indian, the Japanese, the Jews. But for the ones whose faces are dark, there is no worthy compensation. Yet we are the ones who, against our will, fostered the birth and prosperity of this nation. So, Mr. President, you're really thinking that it may just be the thing to offer an apology, to take away the sting. And do you think that those 3 words are so powerful as to bring a ray of hope, a fresh new start, a new let freedom ring? Do you really think that just saying it will bring about such relief as to wash away the awful or obliterate the grief? Well, Mr. President, I've got 3 words for you. Apology not accepted.
Wow. Wow. It's very powerful, Pravada.
Very. I was racing ahead to the conclusion of your poem, Dr. B, because I thought your last 3 words were going to be "go to hell." You know, but I think apology not accepted says the same thing in a more polite way. Listen, this is a great way to end this program, this conversation. And Dr. B, thank you so much. We'll be here next week. And we want to invite people to weigh in, to join us, and to broaden this conversation. I think it's a rich conversation. I call it a masterclass with you, Dr. B, and you, Dr. Oliver Williams. Thank you so very much. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next week.